What's up, guys? This is Takatoshi Shibayama, the host of the Future Design Podcast. So, what do you know about quantum computing? Going into this episode, I did a little bit of reading, but with my limited knowledge, it was very hard to get a full grasp of what it exactly is. So, this turned out to be a Q&A session about learning about quantum computing, and I hope they'll be educational for you as well. I had all these questions like, will quantum computing assist in the development of general AI? Will it crack blockchain's encryption? What does it have to do with quantum physics? In this short session with Shalika Verma, the director of Microsoft, I hope I answered some of these questions that you all had too. So without further ado, here is Shalika Verma. Shalika Verma, thank you again for being on our Future Design Podcast.
Yeah, thank you, and it's an honor to be here. I really enjoyed our last conversation, and I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yes, last time we have a really brilliant chat about artificial intelligence and making an impact in the business world. But since then, you moved on. You moved companies. You moved your profession. You went from AI to quantum computing. So, what made you think about the change?
Yeah, so I moved profession, which is right. I mean, I did switch the job. I did not switch the technology domain. I was always part of quantum, even in my earlier job, and today as well, right? And both the times that this is really a stretch work that I do. This is not the job. This is not my main job. So in the new role, I'm responsible for driving innovation using technology across on Microsoft's platform via the partner community. But quantum is something that has been in my head for a long time, and I do look forward to this technology as a game changer. So I'm sort of continuing that interest here. I just got lucky because I moved from IBM, which is a pioneer in quantum, and I landed in Microsoft, who is also doing some amazing work in this space.
I think everybody knows about the IBM Qiskit. I think that's what it's called, that people can build upon, and it's an open source technology as well. So I think there's many interesting things that are happening in this space. But for me, before we dive into the world of quantum computing, can you also ask the guests who are probably first time listening to this podcast, who is Shalika Verma?
Yeah, so just to give my background, right, I have about 20 years of industry experience, uh, all aligned with technology, and this spans across multiple professions, starting from research development and the technical sales profession. I have found my sweet spot in technical sales because this gives me a chance to be with the customers where the end problems are solved, while at the same time staying rooted in the technology. So it's like uh, seeing the technology coming alive, and that's what sort of motivates me. So yeah, so that's about me, Takatoshi, and I hope I made it interesting enough for people to
Yeah,
listen in.
yeah. And it's funny that we're talking about technologies, but I hear birds chirping in the background, which gives it a more holistic feel to it. So let's talk about quantum computing. So usually in our podcast, we talk about more about why we're doing it rather than how we're doing it. But just for the listeners and also for my educational sake as well, what is quantum computing?
Yeah, I mean, hard to describe without lot of slides here. But in a nutshell, think about this as creating an abstraction using quantum physics, right? Like, for example, in today's classical computer, we have created this abstraction called as bit using 0 and 1. And that 0 and 1 is nothing but voltage on your transistors. And then you are using this abstraction to create lot of algorithms and problem solvers, and you're pretty much the entire software world is built on top of the zeros and ones, which is what you see coming alive every day, be it your laptop or the servers or even the mainframe state of the art technologies, and even for that matter whatever you see on cloud, right? Now in quantum computing, this abstraction is called as qubit. This is created not by the semiconductor voltage, but instead of using really an artificial atom or an ion and use its quantum properties. Now, by definition, quantum particles do not just exhibit yes or no state, but they can be somewhere mid. That is called as that principle is called as superposition, and this one principle differentiates a qubit a lot from a bit. And this really creates many interesting opportunities to approach a problem domain in a very, very different way, fundamentally.
Yes, I've watched a couple of videos and I read a couple of books as well on this, and the concept is pretty abstract as well. I mean, one needs to learn a bit more about quantum physics and all these other theories behind it. But so if most people are probably concerned is like, why do we need quantum computing to begin with? I've read about like, there's a lot of chemical molecules that are existing in this world, and we can't really solve it with our regular computers, and we need to have quantum computing to solve, let's say caffeine. Well, why does it work in our brain? And how that changes within our mind is very different from what we know really about the chemical compound of it.
Yeah, you're right? So there are many problems that when we solve it in a classical computer, we are already doing a lot of approximation. Now, you took a very interesting example of chemical molecules. Say, think about a very small molecule like hydrogen, right? Maybe having one electron and two hydrogen molecules come together. So really in the molecular orbit, you are looking at two electrons, right? And they interact with each other to create a structure. Now, anything that is more complex than hydrogen, if you look at the way that gets represented in theoretical chemistry, it's something called as Schrodinger's equations. Right? And Schrodinger's equations does have quantum behavior embedded in that. It works with the superposition and entanglements, and you do not have a direct way to represent this on a classical computer, because on classical computers a bit is either 0 or 1, it cannot be both, which is essential for our molecular simulation. Similarly, bits cannot be entangled. You will have to change every bit separately on a classical computer, whereas in quantum, if the particles or the atoms are entangled, then they will change each other based on how the changes are happening to one, right? It will change, it will impact the other one. Uh, Now, this is one part of the problem definition, right? So creating a more accurate simulation of molecules is one of the use case on quantum computer, and that can give rise to a lot of interesting industrial problem solutions. I mean, it can span from what you explained in terms of caffeine, right? Do we understand how it impacts us? From there, it can go up to a very seemingly innocuous problem like fertilizer creation, right? Which works with something called as nitrogen fixation. And today, this ammonia creation is very high energy, high pressure reaction for us. It consumes about 7% of world's energy, but we know that earthworms do it all the time in the earth without really consuming any energy, right? So we know that we don't know how to get it right. And if there is a way for us to really make it right, then the amount of energy that you will end up saving just in the fertilizer production is massive. And then to the right spectrum of that is really the medicine creation, right? So today you are really working with a lot of chemical compounds to find the right medicine for many kind of life threatening diseases. And even to that matter, you don't know how those really interact with an individual genomics or DNA footprint, which is major hurdle for you to create, say, a precision medicine, right? So all of this can actually have a huge potential in being much more accurately solved if you are able to create a quantum representation of that. So this is really the chemistry world of it. You also have another world which is like classically exponential problem solving, right? So like for example, the traveling salesman problem, or the problem which has got so addition of one component if it really scales exponentially. And just to give you a very layman kind of example, suppose 10 friends are there at a dinner table. how many combinations are there in which those friends can be seated? About 3.6 million combinations. What if one new friend joins you? How many more combinations will you have? 36 million. So that one guy joining in is really creating an exponential scale for you to deal with, right? And this is something that by nature of qubits, because they can be superposition and are able to access the entire problem space and the solution space simultaneously, that gives you a path to solve this problem much more effectively and efficiently. This is really the optimization, right? So there is a potential to solve a lot of optimization problems very easily. Now all these problems will map back into interesting way you started with your uh, funding portfolio optimization. So portfolio optimization is a very classic case of how the optimizers can solve the problems effectively. So that is one use case that you can look at. But the optimization also applies to a supply chain management. It also applies to traffic routing. So all of these problems also come under the umbrella of where quantum computing can be very effective, both in terms of accuracy for the same kind of problem complexity, or can be more fast for same kind of accuracy.
Yeah, that's very interesting because we had an episode about IoT and pandemics, and we're creating these smart cities. And let's say we drop a pandemic in a simulator and see how the city works. I think there's a lot of speculation around what quantum computing can do. And obviously, for a lot of technologies out there, it is overhyped. And I think what we need to do is go back to reality and say, what can it do? But the thing is, what can it do now is very different from what can happen in the future as well, right? Maybe 10, 20, 30 years down the road, these things are going to be exponentially much better than they are right now. So, just having a little peek into the real future, I mean, what is it that can really solve that we think right now that probably can't do?
Yeah. So just to be fair, right? Currently, most of the work happening on quantum computers, actual hardware, is very small scale. There is no computer which can really solve a massive real life problem on a quantum computer today. Just to be fair, right? And I do see a path to that happen at least at the intermediate scale in say next 7 or 8 years. However, um, the entry barrier is a bit steeper on quantum computers. So it's not that a computer will be available and suddenly the next day the software will start spinning out. That is not going to happen. So you will have to start a bit early, and you will have to create something called as simulators, which almost every quantum hardware vendor who is trying to build a quantum hardware has created. Right? So everybody has come up with a quantum simulator. And our best path of solving software problems is really start doing softwares and start running them on a simulator. Now, this is important for two phases, right? First is, how do you know, because you are writing the algorithms from the scratch now, there is no experience really that we carry on writing an algorithm on a quantum computer, right? So it's a fresh new thing that you are really spinning out. How do you test whether what you are saying and algorithmically is right or wrong? Because if there is no supercomputer that you will be able to build with the current semiconductor technology that can beat maybe a 60, 70 qubit of quantum computer. Right? So if you are really running something directly on a 70 qubit quantum machine at a large scale, there is really no way for you to test it back on a classical computer. Those problems are not solved here, right? So it is always better to start your algorithmic development at a smaller stage and test it against the classical logics that we have developed so far, just to know the accuracy of our own algorithms and understanding the fidelity and the accuracy of the quantum qubits itself. So this is an important step, and this is where you see a lot of traction today. People are writing code, simulating it, and running it on both classical simulator as well as the quantum machine at a smaller scale. Now, in Microsoft, I realized that there is also another approach to it, right? While, for example, we will all be focused on our holy grail of universal gate-based quantum computers. there is lot that you can do in the optimization space by something called as annealing, right? And D-Wave really mastered the game of creating quantum annealers. But you can actually do a lot of annealing on classical simulators again, right? And this is in Microsoft terminology, this is called as quantum inspired optimizer or QIO, right? And this is something which where instead of using the so I'm just going to get a bit more technical here, but in annealing there is something called as thermal jump that you do to identify whether you are really able to find out that local optimal low energy state for your solution or not. And in quantum annealing you do something called as quantum tunneling, and probability of you finding really the right or better solution using quantum tunneling is way better than your ability to find it via say a thermal jump. Hence the new way of looking at annealing itself is called as quantum inspired algorithm writing, and that you can actually do at a large scale with the current compute power available on classical simulators, and it will still give you good enough results for optimization problems, especially yes no kind of optimization problems, right? And if you really look at your AI use cases, these problems really cut across about 70% of your use cases. So there is a huge potential to do this today while we still start experimenting on the software algorithms that will run on real large scale quantum hardware. I hope I tried to put this in the right perspective from the core development side, right? Now there is another story to it though, that is about breaking the cryptography. We all know that there is an algorithm that Shor gave us, right, in 1986, long back, that can potentially give us a easier path to solve prime number factorization. And that is one problem statement on which the impossibility or the difficulty of solving that problem is the basis of almost all security algorithms that we have built so far. So now we are saying we are entering into a world potentially 10 years down the line where this way of securing your systems is not secure enough because breaking key is not going to be a problem anymore. Now, why am I saying that this is an important problem today? Is because there are many industries which are regulated, like healthcare industry, like banking industry, where you really want to protect the data not for a year, not for two, but maybe probably 15 years, right? 20 years. You want to protect the data for those many years. So you are now looking at a probable situation where if you compromise the data today because it is encrypted, you feel that it is safe because it is encrypted. But the validity of that data is longer term, and maybe 8 or 9 years down the line, there is a possibility that whoever downloaded that data today probably will be able to hack and look through. So, a proactive work for really securing the data and making it quantum proof, especially for the industries which are regulated and where we are dealing with sensitive data. I think that is really opportune time now, where we should be looking at the different techniques, and massive amount of work is happening in that area to really create quantum proof security standards. And I'm sure we will see a lot of movement in this space in the coming future, Takatoshi.
Yeah, I remember when we had an episode with Peter DeMayo from IBM. They were making cryptocurrency custody services or custom technologies that are quantum proof. And we were joking at that time that how can quantum computing is not even like really main scale at this point already. IBM is making something that's quantum proof already, which is really funny.
I hope I clarified why it is important right now.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the encryption that are happening right now can be what you're saying is can be attacked by quantum computing. So we need to prepare ourselves for that future, which may be 10 or 15 years down the line. And so businesses have to start thinking about, okay, so if this future is really coming, then we have to completely change our encryption model so that it fits that the potential future that's coming.
Yes.
Right. So in terms of like blockchain, for instance. I mean, the whole value proposition for cryptocurrency in general, or many people look at Bitcoin nowadays, is that it can't be hacked because it has a very strong encryption model. Can quantum computing really hack blockchain?
Yeah, it can, because again, the blockchain secure algorithms also work on the fundamentally RSA, and RSA is vulnerable for via quantum computers, right? So yeah, so anything that uses RSA at the base of their cryptography, and that is pretty much anything right now in the digital world, is a potential candidate which should get revised. And I think, it really depends on the currency of the data, though. Like, for example, if I have some data today, if it gets hacked, if that data is going to lose its value maybe a year down the line, I don't have to worry about it. It's okay, because the quantum computer is not hacking that, not able to break it within a year, right? We know that the path is about 8 years, 9 years. So anything that you don't want to get compromised, that you're creating today but don't want to get compromised 8 years down the line, that is what you should be bringing on your radar to secure now.
And you touched upon a little bit on artificial intelligence as well with quantum computing. The things that general artificial intelligence is trying to solve is how do we get consciousness from artificial intelligence. And I guess from what we're discussing right now is that our standard computers are obviously not going to get there. Would quantum computing solve that issue?
It won't. So, I mean, it can get very philosophical on why and what can happen and can't happen. But let's just say, in itself, this technology will only make us do what we are doing more efficiently, in terms of achieving the exponential scale, or removing some of the approximations, right? So it will just pile on the progress, or the risks that each of these strings will carry with themselves while they go on a path of improvement. Quantum computing will just tag along and probably help it enhance it more, maybe on the positive side or on the negative side, yet to be seen.
Yeah, that's what we always talk about on this podcast is technology is always shapeless, it's tasteless, and it's humans that actually give it that color, right? And it could go into different directions. And also, this is what I wanted to talk to you about, because last time we had our episode, after we finished recording, we were talking about quantum computing and philosophy as well. And I just wanted to touch base with you on that. And what is your philosophy behind, or ideas behind, like quantum computing that really, thought made you think about like philosophy in the first place?
So it's not so much about quantum computing, I would say. It's a lot related to quantum physics. I think that is where a lot of philosophical angle comes in, because quantum physics, I find, is not very intuitive. It's not something that has a cause and reason. I mean, cause and effect kind of relationship, right? It's not very easy to say because of this happened. It is more like, I know this happens, I don't know why, and really able to live with that ambiguity, and still have faith in what you are observing, and what maths is telling you, and go ahead with that flow, is what makes quantum physics a very unique phenomena, I would say, in the scientific world, right? Now, there are many things that many scientists have debated over the year. I mean, about the Schrodinger's thought experiment, about, the cat is live or dead. Einstein famously said that if entanglement works, this is like a spooky action. There are also, because of the random behavior of quantum computers, there are scientists who have said something like, God does not play a dice, something is wrong with your theory. But all of this sort of over the year has uh, turned out to be just talk, because the end result of what we are observing is not changing, right? So I recently shared one of the LinkedIn posts where somebody had pointed out the inspirations that Schrodinger himself drew from lot of Indian scriptures, and how he dealt with the uncertainty that the quantum physics gave him by using some of the faith and the scripture aspects of it to deal with that kind of thought process. uh, and that's what I really find very fascinating, right? Now, just to build upon the philosophical aspect, right? One of the experiment that I know of is this double slit experiment, which really talks about the dual nature of a photon, which can act like a wave and like a particle, right? Dual nature of a light. And then there is this double slit experiment where it generally behaves like a wave and creates an interference pattern. But the moment you place an uh, observer can be an instrument, but the moment you have an observer, an instrument which is detecting it, its behavior changes to being a particle. And that itself is fascinating enough. And we now know that the observation really influences the quantum particle, and it collapses the wave function. So, which itself is something like, by observation you can change a physical reality. That is very philosophical. But at the same time, there was a experiment that was done by a separate branch of scientists called as noetic sciences. And their experiment was, instead of really putting that instrument there on your double slit experiment, they tried to have people meditating in the next room, focusing on that particle and saying, can meditation and your thought of this being a particle really change it? And there were some results which said that even the meditation really impacts the way the photon is behaving. And that sort of gave me a thought on, how are we looking at the consciousness, and does really we have this one collective consciousness, and does it, what we think, does it really impact our external reality? Because it seems to be capable of doing that, at least at a quantum level. It may not manifest uh, so palpably probably in the physical world, but probably things change, right? So that is also one aspect of how I look at quantum physics. Lot of times when I try to deal with this wave function collapse, I lot of times uh, create an analogy in my mind in the way the brain functions, because we are always in so many thoughts. It is almost like a superposition, right? You are always thinking about so many things at any given point in time. But if somebody just snaps you out of your dream and say, what are you thinking? You're probably going to blur out one thought which probably is going to be predominant. This is like wave function collapse, right? And you will really struggle later on to say, why did you pick this thought amongst all others that they were going on your mind to talk about? And it's and this is where I really find the fascination. But yeah, that's about it. I mean, I just go on for days on this topic, but yeah.
I think it really depends on who asked that question as well. So if it's your child or if your husband or your colleague, it really depends at that point. And I'm sure you're going to give them a different answer. And I think that's how, those wave is, right? And I have a Thai temple right next to my house, and I hear chanting on a daily basis all throughout the day. And that frequency really changes the mood and the way, the state of mind that I am when I enter my office. This area that I am right now. And I think that has a huge difference compared to having no chanting whatsoever. And I think that really also gives that difference of what the kind of environment or like this capacity that I'm inside to feel a certain way. And I think that's really, we actually just think it's just a mood, or we just hear something and it's just a mood, but then quantum physics can describe that for us, right? And which is very interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, yes, I agree. It's a very fascinating world.
Yeah, and just to close off our discussion though, but in terms of quantum physics and quantum computing, I mean, how do they relate to each other? Because does the quantum computing tell us why that is happening?
Yeah, no. So yeah, okay. So this is where the difference is, right? Quantum physics really tries to approach why of many observations, and I would say that's a humongous effort. But quantum computing relies on the observation. It does not try and answer why. So it uses the principle of superposition, it uses the principle of entanglement, it uses the principle of interference that quantum physics gives us. It believes that this is what will happen, and it tries to uses that fact for computational purpose. So it doesn't really go into the why part of it. It just takes it for the face value and tries to leverage it for other computational purposes. So that's how I would, in a nutshell, call out quantum computing.
Then I guess will give us a bit more scientific view on why we do certain things, why certain things affects us, and that's a very promising technology that we can really look forward to, and hopefully we can observe the way that sometimes we're like really malicious towards something or good to something, and we can scientifically say that this is why and this is how it's happening, and that's really interesting. And before we part, I mean, is there any closing comments that you'd like to give us in terms of what you're seeing the development right now? What kind of hopes that we can have?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's an exciting world, folks. Whoever is watching this video should really go look up something on quantum computing. It's a technology that, whenever materializes mainstream, will be a game changer for all of us, and hence, all of us collectively need to stay tuned to it. There are multiple fields on quantum computing. Which leverages quantum physics principles, including quantum computing. I talked about quantum cryptography. There is quantum communication as well, which I think has got a lot more promise at this stage. So keep looking, keep experimenting, and keep reading, folks. And I would really love and appreciate the comments. Feel free to reach out as well if anybody is interested and would like to get started on the learning path. Thank you. Thank you for your time here and the opportunity as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if anybody wants to follow Shalika, she's on LinkedIn, so please reach out to her. So thank you very much. Hi, this is your host Takatoshi Shibayama. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Now, if you enjoyed or disliked the show, please let me know by writing in the comment section. The only way I can improve or add value to you is through your voices. If there are any topics that you would like me to pick up, please also let me know in the comments. I'd love to start chatting with you all. And if you would like to continue watching the show, please subscribe. Thank you.